Thank you, Tim. Hello, everyone. Thank you for choosing this section about APT41 group. Before we get started, let me ask you a couple of questions. Do you know who APT41 are? How and whom do they attack? How to defend against their attacks, and how to track their infrastructure? If the answer to at least one question is no, then this section will give you the answer that you need. Today, I'm going to tell you about their latest attacks, as well as some give useful tips on how to effectively track their infrastructure, and other curious features that we discovered in the course of our research. I am Nikita Rostovtsev, and I am Cyber Threat Intelligence Analyst in APT Research Group. I have been working in Group IB for more than 3 years. Also, I have a master's degree in information security, and I am the author of many of our private research, as well as some public ones. Some of them actually listed on the current slide. A small summary of what awaits you in the next 40 minutes. First of all, who are APT41, and why is it important to be able to detect their activity? So, APT41 is a national state group with multiple objectives: cyber espionage and financial gain. According to our data, this group has been active since at least 2007. You may have heard other names of this group. The most famous are Barium and Vinci. In August 2020, the United States Department of Justice issued an indictment against specific individuals associated with this group of hackers. These persons are suspected of unauthorized access to protected systems, money laundering, theft, fraud, and so on. Also, at the beginning of the summer, we published a blog post about TK campaign. According to our information, this campaign was carried out by this group of hackers. This research focused on the Air India attack, in which we shared important TTPs, indicator of compromise, and best practices for tracking attackers so that organizations around the world can defend themselves against attacks by this group. Today's presentation is also a continuation of this research. What awaits you today and what I am going to tell you? I would like to tell you how the attackers conduct their attacks. What techniques do you use for reconnaissance? What services and tools are used during this phase? It's also important to highlight the stage of penetration in the target systems. What tools are used in this phase? We will also talk about how the attackers gain foothold in compromised systems and how they move from one device to another. I will tell and show you some of what attackers are looking for in the target systems. I will also share the story of how we track the infrastructure and how you can do it as well. And last but not least, what artifacts and other interesting features of APT41 attacks we found in the course of our research. Now you understand who they are. It's time to tell briefly what attacks came into our field of vision in 2021. Since the beginning of 2021, this group of hackers has conducted at least 4 malicious campaigns, which we named after the domains used in these attacks: TK, DLA Link TK, Mute Pond, and Gentle Voice. The target of these attacks were various organizations from the USA, Taiwan, India, Great Britain, Thailand, and many others. However, the victims were organizations from the following areas: software manufacturers from China and the USA, news agencies, government organizations, and one large electronic manufacturing company from Taiwan, one educational organization and payment system from Vietnam. You should see a complete list of attacked countries on the screen. In total, the attackers managed to compromise the network perimeter of 13 organizations. Now, it's time to go directly to the attackers' tactics, techniques, and procedures. What exactly did they do for this or that stage? I want to note that in this presentation, the attackers' TTPs are marking to the metro matrix. Accordingly, you can learn about the specific techniques and methods of mitigation by their number on the site metro.org. It's also important that the techniques used in this presentation are generally description on what we have observed in the course of many attacks. Okay, where does the target attack start? Reconnaissance, right? At the reconnaissance stage, the attackers can use a wide range of techniques to collect data about target organizations, and they can all be roughly divided into categories: active and passive scanning. So what did the APT41 use to actively scan target networks? Firstly, it's a popular Aconnetics vulnerability scanner, powerful and free Nmap port scanner, various utility for directory enumeration on target web servers, for example, one for all, subdomain free, sublister, a tool for finding and exploiting vulnerabilities in GBoss and other Java applications, JAX-Boss. For passive scanning, it was found that the attackers are using the fofa.su service. This service is a Chinese equivalent of shadan.io. This service scans the whole internet and collects information about open ports, as well as some services running on them. This allows the attackers to more effectively identify a set of targets and conduct their attacks. One of the main questions of any attack is, how did the attackers get into the target system? As we know, APT41 can use various techniques at this stage, such as spear phishing emails, exploiting vulnerabilities in proxy logon, for example, watering holes, or attack on supply chains. In the attack we observed, the attackers infiltrated target system using SQL injections. Such attacks were carried out using the publicly available tool SQLmap. SQLmap has been used by the attackers for several purposes. In some organizations, the APT41 group is able to access to the target server operation system shell and execute some commands. This tool was also used by the group of attackers to upload their malicious file to the target server, and the files at this stage could be either of Cobalt Strike beacon or some private web shells. In other cases, they got access to the storage files of system accounts or to entire database storing user data, such as list of emails and passwords. It's important to note here that the main tool used by the attackers in all campaigns is the Cobalt Strike beacon. As a result of these SQL injections, the attackers were able to gain varying level of access on 33 of the 64 websites they tested. We were able to build the following diagrams based on the SQLmap logs. According to this data, MySQL was installed on the most of compromised sites. Fine, we talk about how the intruders get inside the perimeter. What techniques do they use next? I would like to point out that the following rather an unusual approach to creating and launching malicious file. Let's look more deeply. This approach is to take a payload, in this case the payload is also Cobalt Strike beacon, encode this payload with base 64, and write it into a TXT file equal to 775 characters per iteration. To write the entire payload to a file is one of the observed cases. The attackers took 154 iterations for this action. After the encoded payload is written to a file, the certutil utility, which is included in the default Windows programs with the -decode parameter, is invoked to turn this base 64 encoded payload into an executable file. After the file has been decoded, the attackers call this utility again with the -hash file parameter. This argument is needed to get the hash of resulting file. This action is due to the fact that each iteration was carried out by the attackers manually, and at some stage, it was possible to make a mistake. Checking the hash sum of the file ensures that the data has been written correctly and that payload has been decoded without any errors. Then this file was renamed, sent to other directories to hide traces, and later it launched by the attackers themselves. Other methods of downloading and executing malicious files have been also identified. They are not unique, but let's talk about them. The APT41 group used PowerShell to generate a reverse shell. This code was executed in stealth mode and allowed in the device on which it was executed to connect to the CNC server in order to execute remote commands by the attackers. Task schedule was also used to launch malicious file both on local computers, on accessible computers in the organization domain network. The same can be said about creating and starting Windows service. These services were created with the task to run either an executable file or a script file called install.bat. By the way, we also wrote about this install.bat script in our blog post about column.tk campaign. Also, this file was mentioned by other security vendors. Windows management implementation was also not ignored by the attackers and was used in several malicious campaigns. Now it's time to talk about how the attackers have gained persistence on the target systems. In general, as we have already noted, the task schedule and the creation of Windows service were also used for these purposes. But it was also found that the attackers in some cases placed their malicious files on remote computers in the autorun directory. Thus, this file were executed every time the next operation system was started. Let's move on to the next point of kill chain, privilege escalation. Unfortunately, we haven't seen any unique way for the attackers to increase their privileges on the network. Basically, in addition to the standard Cobalt Strike capabilities and additional modules and CNA scripts were used for these purposes, the public tools for local privilege escalation like baked potato are also used for these purposes. Accounts or password hashes obtained at the stage of data collection were also used by the attackers to elevate their privileges. How did the attackers try to hide or cover their tracks? To obfuscate their malicious files, the attackers used the well-known Timida protector. It was also noticed how the attackers, after downloading information from Windows event log, deleted temporary files so as not to leave traces of themselves. After certain malicious files became unnecessary for the attackers, they removed them. As I said, Cobalt Strike was the main tool among all campaigns. The attackers developed their own custom injector that bypasses event tracing for Windows, thereby allowing this process to go unnoticed by the Windows logging system. The second feature of this injector is the method taken from the open GitHub repository. The goal of this method is to be able to start a new process in such a way that Windows and any antivirus tools cannot inject their binaries into this process, which allow the attackers to bypass the built-in antivirus tools. OK, what about the credentials? How do they get them? For this, again, several different rather popular techniques are used. To begin with, most of the time, the attackers used the NTDS utility, which built into a Windows system. Using this utility, the attackers obtained a copy of the ntds.dit file, which is actually a database that stores Active Directory information, such as users, group, and group membership information. This base also includes password hashes for all users in the domain. The next place, which is also capable of giving account data to the attackers, is SAM, Security Account Manager. Some manage the Windows accounts database and perform the function of storing password and private user data. This data is available either in the specific registry key or in a binary file in Win directory. As you can see, the attackers try to make a copy of this database from the registry using the regserve command, or try to get this file using the shadow disk copies. Another method to collecting accounts is to retrieve them from LSAS memory. LSAS, Local Security Authority Subsystem Service, is a process in Windows operation systems that is responsible for enforcing security policies on a system. It verifies that users log on to the Windows computer, procedures password changes, and generates access tokens. To obtain a copy of this process, attackers use the ProcDump utility, as well as Mimikatz. You can also highlight the use of the browser host utility, which aim to obtain credentials from the browsers. And searching for a specific string that contained keyword like user, password, and these words were searched in the specific web configs or entire directories. Now, let's take a look how the attackers collect information about compromised host and local network around them. At this stage, the tools that are included in the operation system are most often used. In the campaign we observed, the attackers use the following utilities: net utility for displaying computer network configuration data. Using this utility, the attackers obtained information about membership of domain groups, displayed list of administrators, and so on. Also, at this stage, the attackers received the basic configuration of the computer, such as Windows version or architecture used. In some cases, the attackers conducted reconnaissance on remote devices in order to determine whether the files with certain names were working on them. These files were downloaded to remote devices by the attackers earlier. The attackers also performed queries to the registry to get information about currently used RDP port or network configuration. In order to identify what other devices are on the local network, the attackers used the ping command with only one echo request. To simplify their work, the attackers used for cycle for this procedure. Also, the attackers used the setSPN utility to find out on which devices in the domain a particular service is running. This step helped the attackers identify which devices were running EAS, SQL, and MS SQL. It's notable that in one of the observed cases, the attackers used the payload line for the location of the required line, which indicates that the command was copied from another sources. Also, at this stage, the attackers used the publicly available tool, cping. This tool was used to identify local computers vulnerable to SMB attacks. To move around the network, the attackers used previously stolen accounts. In cases where the attackers had only password hashes, they carry out pass the hash attack using the Mimikatz utility. To collect the data of interest, the APT41 group uploaded a portable archiver onto a compromised device. They zipped the files, and after, they downloaded them to their server. In the network of one software vendor, the attackers managed to gain access to the developer's GitHub repository. This repository stored various sensitive data, such as accounts for remote service, private certificates, and a list of private servers. The attackers also got the files they needed from shadow copies and the Windows logging system. As I already mentioned, most of the attacks were carried out using the Cobalt Strike tool. To communicate with the attacker's command and control servers, the attackers used HTTP and HTTP listeners. And to hide the fact of communication with the command and control server, the attackers also used denials channels. Another tool in the attacks we observed was the FearPC traffic proxy tool. FearPC is a modified version of the open source FearP tool. It's a loaded system inside a router or firewall, providing NAT to provide network access to the system located outside of the victim network. The attackers also used Cobalt Strike to upload their files onto a compromised device. For individual organizations, the attackers download these files from special directories named after the compromised organization. What the attackers looking for in the compromised networks? For most part, the attackers sought to gain access to various server configurations, backup data, and various user data. According to our intelligence, the attackers didn't download a large volume of confidential documents. And now, it's time to move on to my favorite part, how you can hunt their infrastructure. It is worth mentioning that some servers were used executively to host the Cobalt Strike framework. Others were used only for active scanning tools through Akunetics. However, there were some servers on which the attackers did everything together. And important point is the fact that all domains used by the attackers are behind Cloudflare protection, but our threat intelligence and attribution system is capable of detecting the backends of servers of various attackers, including APT41. So our clients are among the first to proactively block new attacker servers. In order to successfully hunt their infrastructure, we need to take a couple of minutes to clarify how Cobalt Strike works. This framework acts as an intermediate server to which attackers from another devices can connect. The connection is made through the default port on the Cobalt Strike server. By default, a self-signed SSL certificate is generated on this port, which by default contains the strings like Cobalt Strike. However, the servers used in this campaign have different certificates on this port, namely these two certificates with the values port awesome. These certificates are unique and clearly indicate that these Cobalt Strike images belong to the attackers. The attackers also use the following unique SSL certificates for listeners and sometimes for team server ports. These certificates are mimics under Microsoft, Facebook, and Cloudflare. You are probably wondering, how many such servers are there? So, according to our intelligence, they began to appear from the beginning of 2020. And their number today is equal to 106 hosts. This means that we have seen over 100 Cobalt Strike servers being used only by this particular group of attackers. Of course, some of them are no longer active. What the other interesting details have been revealed as a result of our investigation? Well, for example, using Chinese characters, using mostly IP addresses to access to Cobalt Strike servers, use the pinyin specific format for naming directories. Pinyin is actually a format, is a recording of the sounds of the Chinese language in the Latin alphabet. In this case, we see a directory called Yuming, written in such format that translates from Chinese as a domain name. Now, let's talk a little about the attackers' working hours. We managed to align all the timestamps of the attackers to UTC +8, and we got the following picture. Firstly, the main working time starts at 9 a.m. and ends closer to 7 p.m. On this map, we can see that in these time zones there are Russia, partially Australia, Malaysia, Singapore, China, and so on. In conclusion, I would like to say that from the moment Cobalt Strike server instances began to be actively distributed on the network, more and more attackers began to use this particular tool. That's why it's important to be able to proactively detect the servers on which this framework is installed, and also to be able to attribute such servers to specific attackers. Our clients are the very first to receive information about such attacks with all the details in the form of indicators, TTPs, as well as the names of compromised organizations in order to better build their business partnerships. Now you know more about one of the most wanted national state groups. You could find them yourselves, and if you suddenly need help, we will be happy to provide it. Thank you.